Talk about a journey. 2024 taught me so much about myself as a person, as a professional, as a creative. It taught me why my village consists of exactly who it consists of and how to continue nurturing them. It taught me what I'm capable of, what my carry capacity is, what I need in order to feel supported and appreciated, what elements of myself I need to protect better, who I really need to be pouring into, where my time and energy is best reciprocated, and which parts of myself I need to be investing more into. And a lot of those lessons were hard learned, but I'm grateful for them. I am not the same person who went into 2024. The me going into 2025 has changed, and that's a beautiful thing. Most of 2024 felt like I was on a treadmill, but the treadmill was a ladder, and I just kept climbing and climbing and climbing. And sure, I was definitely getting stronger for it, but eventually I started wondering where the end of the ladder was. And there was no floor, so I just had to keep climbing. I was so exhausted, but I couldn't stop, and all I wanted was a break, a moment. The treadmill ladder finally stopped somewhere around the middle of the third quarter, and for the first time in what felt like eons, I was finally able to finish the climb and reach the next floor. My feet were finally on the ground again. My arms and legs could finally rest. I could finally start to catch my breath because for such a long time, breathing felt a lot like drowning. And I know because I've almost drowned for real. And even though I was back on solid ground and I could finally take a moment, it felt like I had been working so hard for so long that I struggled to figure out what rest looked like for me. And I couldn't even really focus on rest. It felt like I really needed to prioritize recovery, but that was a challenge too, honestly. Four Quarter Creative was born during a period of recovery, not during a period of rest. I'm still actively navigating what that rest period looks like for me. The holiday break wasn't nearly long enough, but it was deeply needed. There is growth in change, and it does take time to settle. And I'm learning that the time that I need will be time that I take, not time that's given to me. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi, which is the process of repairing broken pottery with gold instead of just throwing it away. It's such a beautiful process. Imagine a gorgeous ceramic bowl falls to the ground and is shattered into a field of pieces. But instead of throwing them all away and mourning the loss, a dedicated soul repairs it by gluing the pieces back together with gold. And sure, it might take months for the mending to fully dry, but once it has, it becomes this completely renewed work of art that's now even more valuable. 2024 broke me into pieces, creatively and professionally, and only a few people saw the breadth of the pieces. But instead of continuing to drag a bag of broken bits everywhere I go, I decided to start the long process of putting them all back together, but better this time. And as a result, not just of the infinity ladder, but of the repair process as well, I have changed, and there's value in that. In the trailer for Four Quarter Creative, I shared my intentions, my hopes for this podcast. I wanted to lay the foundation for transparency and growth throughout the journey because you can't just go around it. You really have to go through it. You have to face it. It's the best way to learn anything. My hope for anyone who has taken the time to watch or listen to any of the episodes that I've made is that there was something in them that resonated with you, something that made you feel less alone and more encouraged. Bringing this podcast to life has been such a labor of love. And this whole time, as I've been trying to water it, the process itself has been watering me. I'm so proud of what's being built in this space. Thank you to everyone who's taken the time to leave a comment sharing where you are on your creative journey, to everyone who's messaged me sharing their takeaways, words of encouragement, to everyone who shared their favorite episodes with others. It means the world to me. This whole journey has been so therapeutic for me. I used to write a lot of poetry and spoken word and journal constantly. And somewhere along the line, I just kind of stopped, got busy, life transitions. I don't know. I can't really put my finger on exactly what happened, but those were such massive parts of my creative expression and self-evaluation. This feels like getting back to that, but in a way I wasn't expecting. Change is such a beautiful thing. I used to be so anxious about change when I was a kid. Change in what felt like routine, people changing, relationships far beyond my control changing, wanting to preserve what felt perfect for as long as humanly possible, but it's just not natural. I've changed so much over the course of my life, and while there are still elements of me that are intrinsic to who I am, I'm shedding a whole lot of the things that have held me back. I think my inner child would be immensely proud of the person she's continuing to become. And despite the mountains and the valleys, I think I've done a really good job at protecting her throughout the journey. And in the same way, I think she's done a fantastic job protecting future me. What I'm pursuing, what I'm trying to build, the impact that I want to have intimidates me. And I'm excited about that. I'm not afraid to fail. I'm afraid of not giving my all, of giving up just before the breakthrough. I used to be so nervous about people seeing me struggle through a process, about being seen learning and trying and experimenting and failing, trapped in this rut of comparison. Well, if me and so have been studying the same thing for the same amount of time, why do I feel like they understand it so much better? Prime example, I studied Spanish for 7 to 8 years between high school, middle school, and parts of elementary school, but never reached fluency. And my teachers would say, it's not your studies, it's your confidence. On paper, the math was mathing. I understood the material. I could comprehend the reading. I could articulate my thoughts, answer the questions. And grammar was never my strong suit, but I was still able to communicate, understand, be understood. I had a classmate in AP Spanish 4 who was also taking AP French and I think German. He was the first polyglot I had met. And there were a few other students who also spoke multiple languages, but he was the first true polyglot I had met, like proficiency through the roof. We were in 10th or 11th grade, and he spoke somewhere between 5 and 7 languages fluently, some of which he had taught himself. Brilliant human being and such a kind person. We both loved learning languages. We both studied, always asked questions in class, listened to music, and watched TV in the languages that we were trying to learn. But the more I reflect on it, the clearer the missing link becomes. The more what my teachers were saying makes sense. My classmate wasn't afraid to make mistakes, to be seen or heard making mistakes often. Our teacher would usually converse with us in Spanish exclusively, including outside the classroom, in passing, in the hallway, in the cafeteria, wherever she would run into us. She would meet us at our proficiency level and gradually push us past that. The longer you held the conversation with her, it would steadily increase in level, and you could feel it in your brain. The moment it went from, this is a nice refresher, to questioning whether or not you had learned this yet. Whenever I was around, while she was chatting with my classmate, it felt like he might as well have been a substitute for the class. The speed, the vocabulary, the ease of conversation all just seemed so effortless. And every so often, I could tell she would correct something like his grammar or his sentence structure. Not because I always understood what they were saying, but because I understood the context that I was pulling from their expressions, the inflections, their body language. And every time my classmate would mess up, he would just laugh about it, repeat the correction a few times, and then jump right back into the flow of conversation, as if he had just pulled into a merge lane, slowed down for a second, and then re-entered traffic. Meanwhile, it felt like I was just trying to cross the Autobahn on foot for funsies. My classmate was failing faster, happily, which also meant that he was learning faster. I was so anxious about looking or sounding incompetent that I wouldn't allow myself the privilege of failure, the joy in failure. So I wasn't reaping the benefits in growth. The mountain I struggled to climb was actual conversation, especially with native speakers. I often felt like I was irritating the other person or wasting their time by taking too long to correctly express my thoughts or interpret what was being said. I had projected onto them that the exchange of information wasn't happening fast enough for them. And I just started believing the story I kept telling myself. At times, when I was conversing with my teacher, I would cop out and revert back to English when my insecurities took the wheel. And it was so frustrating because I would see myself do it as if I was watching the whole thing play out and I knew I was being ridiculous. I'd wasted enough time synonymizing other people's gifts with my own insecurities, fighting to remind myself that I have gifts of my own too. Forgetting that just because something looks like a gift on the surface, that doesn't mean it wasn't hard fought. Some are given, some are grown. Plant the seeds, feed the soil. Here are some of the seeds I'm planning to nurture throughout 2025. Some I've already planted, and others I'm still in the process of figuring out exactly what they need. This year, I want to understand my brain better. This means being consistent with therapy and talking to a psychiatrist to understand if there are nuances in my brain that I failed to nurture and appreciate because I didn't realize that they were there. I plan to continue my language studies and be more consistent with them, but I can't approach them all the same way. I have different relationships with each of them, so I need to pay more attention to what works really well for me as I'm studying them to better set myself up for success. For example, with sign language, the two best resources for me have been this app called Lingvano and a deaf professor that I studied with for about 2 months on this site called italki. For Portuguese, my favorite resources have been music, a tutor I also found on italki, and watching Brazilian shows on Netflix. For Japanese, it's been music, learning my favorite anime openings, and Steam games or other apps because of the visual process of learning hiragana and katakana and eventually kanji. This year, I intend to be better about my physical health, being more active and less sedentary, sweating more, getting more fresh air, challenging myself more, rebuilding my muscles, and increasing my flexibility. Lastly, I'd love to learn a new skill, specifically guitar and piano, with things like Rocksmith for the guitar and Rolly for piano. Usually, I don't share what I'm working on or experimenting with until I've made some progress or it's complete. But in the spirit of some transparency, I'm not going to let fear of disappointment prevent me from letting people know that I'm trying. It's okay to be seen trying. As always, transferring good energy, and until next time.